All right, what was today's video supposed to be about? Oh, yeah, filters. Got it. Cool. Okay, so yeah. Let's open up Snapchat. Yep. All right. Wait a minute. That's not the type of filters you guys came here for, was it? All right. And I'm deleting Snapchat now. Hey guys, Tony with 319 Photography, 319photography.com. Believe it or not, that was the first time that I've ever used Snapchat. I had to have my 16-year-old niece give me a crash course in how to use it. That was interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. That's not the type of filters we're going to talk about today. Not at all. Before I get into it, do me a favor, subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell for the notifications so that you know when we drop new videos. And also, if you haven't done it already, cruise over to our website at 319photography.com. Check out our website. You can see all of our really cool workshops that we're offering, and you can sign up for our newsletter. And every week, I'm sending out tutorial tips to our email subscribers. So check it out and sign up. All right, let's get into filters. So I'm going to show you 3 different types of filters that I would suggest you invest in if you're wanting to get into using filters for the first time. You want to experiment around with it. Disclaimer, guys, filters are not cheap. They're an investment. And I would caution you against buying cheap filters. It's kind of like the whole I'm going to get a $20 UV filter and put on front of my lens idea. I don't necessarily advocate that because I spent, $8, $9, $12, $13, $1,400 on this really good lens, and then I'm going to put $20 cheap glass in front of it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So just know filters aren't cheap. They are investment, but what you can do with them is well worth the money, and they'll last forever if you'll take care of them. So the filters that I use, they're made by a company called Breakthrough Photography, and no, I don't get paid money to talk about them. Not yet anyway. But I happen to just like their products, I like their filters, and I like the company. So I'm going to give them some free advertising. I'll put their website link in the video description so you can check that out. All right, so the first filter that I'm going to talk about is called a circular polarizer. And if you've never used a circular polarizer, maybe you've worn a pair of sunglasses that are polarized, just like these, right? Love these. When you put those sunglasses on, the world looks a little different, right? Things have a little bit more contrast. The blues in the skies look a little bit more saturated. Glare and reflections are reduced. So exact same thing happens when you use one of these type of filters on front of your lens. A lot of polarizers are variable. So that means as you spin or rotate the filter, it changes or applies the effect in different areas of your image. So that's handy, right? So if I just want to reduce reflections or glare on a lake, right? Maybe I'm shooting across a lake. I can apply that portion of the filter more towards the lake versus the sky or the rest of the image. Circular polarizer. If you're not going to use any other filter, I would highly suggest you start out with this one because it will change your landscape photography game almost instantly. It's a cool filter. And doing it on camera is much better than trying to replicate it in Photoshop or Lightroom. All right, next filter. that I'm going to talk about is a neutral density filter. These are usually, if you get the square variety, they're a little bit smaller, right? But they will reduce the amount of light that your camera sees by different stops, right? So this happens to be a 6-stop neutral density filter. So you can see that's pretty dark, right? I mean, I can still see through it a little bit, but it's pretty dark. This reduces the amount of light coming into my camera by 6 stops. Really good for different types of daytime long exposure photography, such as waterfalls and whatnot. I'll show you some of that here in just a minute. This happens to be a bracket that will hold my filters. Right? And I slide it in. And then this bracket sits, it attaches to this ring where that holds my circular polarizer, and then that sits in front of my lens. So I start stacking these filters. Yeah, start stacking these filters. Next filter, graduated neutral density filter. It's graduated because, well, it's darker at the top and clear at the bottom. And there's a gradient in between. This is really cool. It's a soft gradient. This is really cool because as I slide it into my filter, right, you can see I can change the amount of filter, right? I can strengthen it at the top more just by the more I slide it, right? And if I need it at the bottom of my image, super easy to invert it. And there we are. And now I can do the same thing from the bottom up versus from the top down. Guys, that's it, right? So why would you need those filters, right? Well, I'm a big proponent of getting things right in camera rather than relying on stuff in post, right? I do think post has to happen, obviously, but I don't want to make post processing do all the heavy lifting, right? I need to do some things right in camera. Getting filters, using filters allows me to do that. It's actually a lot of fun to use filters. And I'm going to show you a couple different images that I created using filters. And the first one I'm going to start out with is this beach scene in Michigan. Happens to be one of my most favorite beach scenes, and it occurred on the shore of Lake Michigan. It wasn't on the east or the west coast, but this was right before a huge storm came through. This was all the storm front, the wind gusts, and all that stuff. This was right at sunset, and there was a little slit on the horizon where the sun peeked through, and it lasted about 15, 20 seconds. And had I not anticipated this happening, I wouldn't have gotten this shot. But I used those exact 3 filters that I just showed you to create this image. And it was shot at f/13 ISO 200 with those filters attached for a 4-second long exposure. Now, why was it only 4 seconds? Well, that sun's pretty bright when it peeked through. Right? I knew that it would be bright, but I also knew I could see what I wanted the final image to look like. If I would have went much longer, all of that water would have just been blurry, right? It wouldn't have had any definition in it. So I wanted to get the swirl patterns and the streaks going in that water. That's why it was only 4 seconds. So there's a different ways to use those filters to create different effects. Right? All right, one more image here. This happens to be a waterfall that was in Glacier National Park, or it still is. It's Avalanche Gorge, and it's actually one of the most unique waterfalls I've seen, just because of the way the water carved out all these nooks and crannies, and pretty cool place. But this is actually a panorama, a vertical panorama. I do that a lot with waterfalls. So it was shot at 70 millimeters, and that's 6 different panels there. Now, this was shot using the circular polarizer and a 6-stop neutral density filter, and that's it, right? It was shot at f/13. Each exposure was, I'm sorry, it wasn't 13, it was f/16. Each exposure was a minute long, and it was at ISO 100. This waterfall happens to be kind of tucked up into a wooded area. Not a lot of sunlight gets down in there, which is actually perfect for waterfalls. So I could do a much longer exposure in the middle of the day. The sun was straight up overhead. So one last waterfall, Miners Falls in the UP of Michigan. It's actually pretty big waterfall. Again, another waterfall panorama. 7 panels here. This was shot with a telephoto lens from an observation deck. This is the only way to see the waterfall at full length. It's about 3-mile hike up into where this waterfall is at. And this was shot at 90 millimeters, ISO of 100, f/16, and exposures 25 seconds. You can see in the back of this image, right, or the top of it, right, the highlighted area, right, where the sun's coming in. So this waterfall was a little bit more exposed to sunlight. Now, this was shot using circular polarizer, 6-stop neutral density filter, and the 3-stop graduated neutral density filter. The graduated neutral density filter came in handy here because the sunlight at the top of this image was blowing out my exposure. So I was able to darken that area with that 3-stop graduated neutral density filter. So there's 3 examples of how I used 3 different types of filters to create images. And these 3 filters, really, you can do a lot with these 3 filters, right? Just by changing your camera settings, right? If I want to go for a longer exposure, right? So let's say I have that 6-stop neutral density filter, and I want to get a longer exposure. Well, if I reduce my ISO, right? So if I drop it to 100, or if your camera can go to 80 or 50, and I close down my aperture in conjunction with using that 6-stop neutral density filter, I can gain a longer exposure time. There's a lot of things you can do with these filters. And there's a ton of different types of filters that are out there. You can get them in larger stops, in smaller stops. You can get them that block different wavelengths of light. You can get cooling filters, warming filters. The possibilities are endless, but I don't think you guys want to sit here and listen to me talk about filters for 3 hours. So I just wanted to tell you about 3 filters that are very versatile and very useful. And if you're wanting to get into filter usage in your daytime landscape photography, those are the 3 that I would highly suggest you explore. Guys, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And until next time, everybody have an awesome day.